They were everywhere, on your screens, in headlines, in conversations. Then they weren't. No big farewell, no final announcement, just silence. After marrying into immense wealth and powerful families, these women didn't just change their lives, they disappeared. So what really happened? Did they walk away from fame or step into something more sinister, a world where being seen is no longer required? In this video, we uncover 7 women whose sudden distance from the spotlight left more questions than answers. Number 7. Assunta de Rossi. We begin our countdown with a screen diva who graced the screens of many during her time. But to truly understand her story, you first have to understand who she was before the silence. Assunta de Rossi rose to fame in the early 2000s as one of Philippine cinema's bold and fearless actresses. At a time when many stayed within safe roles, she stood out by doing the opposite, choosing characters that were emotionally intense, complex, and sometimes controversial. She wasn't just known for beauty. She was known for presence, the kind that made people stop and watch, the kind that stayed with audiences long after the credits rolled. For years, she lived in a world where visibility was constant: film sets, premieres, interviews, and media features. Her life moved at the speed of the entertainment industry. But behind the film sets and flashing cameras, something quieter was unfolding. Her personal life was beginning to take a different direction. She eventually entered a long-term relationship and later married Jules Ledesma, a prominent Filipino businessman and political figure from Negros Occidental, someone deeply connected to one of the country's influential and well-established families. And this is where the shift truly began. Not in headlines, not in controversy, but in silence. Because the world she was stepping into operated very differently from show business. It wasn't built on attention, it was built on privacy, on structure, on influence that doesn't need to be seen to be felt. And slowly, almost without people realizing it at first, Assunta's presence began to change. Fewer film roles, fewer red carpet appearances, fewer interviews where she once spoke openly about her career and life. It wasn't an announcement. It wasn't a goodbye. It was a gradual distancing. And that's what made it more noticeable. Because when someone disappears loudly, people understand it. But when someone fades quietly, people start asking questions. Where did she go? Why does it feel like she's no longer part of the industry she once helped define? Was this a personal decision or the natural result of entering a completely different world? A world where public attention is optional, where being seen is no longer necessary, where the life you build exists beyond cameras, beyond headlines, and beyond public access. Fans didn't witness a final moment. There was no last appearance that marked the end. Instead, they experienced something more subtle, and in many ways more mysterious: a slow fade. One that happened in real time but only became obvious in hindsight. And over time, that absence became louder than her presence ever was. Because in the world of fame, silence doesn't go unnoticed. It creates intrigue. It builds curiosity. And sometimes, it rewrites the narrative entirely. So now the question becomes unavoidable. When a public figure disappears from view like this, is it truly retirement? Or is it something else entirely? A relocation into a life the public was never meant to fully access. But if Assunta's story feels like a gradual fade, the next woman didn't just capture attention. She defined elegance for an entire generation of Philippine television. And her connection to one of the country's most established business families only deepens the mystery behind her quiet shift away from constant visibility. 6. Dawn Zulueta. Before anything else, she was considered royalty in Philippine showbiz. Dawn Zulueta wasn't just another actress rising through the ranks. She was a presence that defined an era. At a time when television dramas shaped everyday conversations, she stood at the center of it all, delivering performances that felt both timeless and deeply personal. She built her legacy on grace, sophistication, and emotional depth, qualities that made her one of the most trusted and admired faces on screen. From the 90s onward, she was everywhere. Primetime dramas, blockbuster films, iconic love teams that audiences followed religiously. For many viewers, she wasn't just a celebrity. She was part of their routine, part of their memories. part of a golden era of Philippine entertainment that still holds nostalgic value today. But behind that consistency, behind the polished image and steady career, her personal life was quietly evolving. She married Anton Lagdamio Jr., a businessman and diplomat connected to one of the Philippines' most influential political and corporate families. And with that, marriage came more than just a new chapter. It came with a different world, a world that operates on discretion rather than exposure. A world where influence is often invisible and presence is carefully controlled. And that's where the shift began. Not a disappearance, but a recalibration. Because Dawn didn't suddenly walk away from acting, she didn't make a dramatic exit. Instead, she became selective, intentional, measured. Her appearances grew fewer. Her projects became more spaced out. Her presence, once constant, became occasional. And in between those appearances, there was silence. Not total silence, but enough to be noticed, because in entertainment, consistency keeps you visible. But gaps create questions. Fans who once saw her regularly now only catch glimpses. A role here, an appearance there, and then nothing for a while. And those spaces in between begin to tell a different kind of story. Not one filled with headlines or controversy, but one shaped by distance. And distance, especially from someone once so visible, always feels bigger than it actually is. It feels like something has changed, like something has been left behind. And that's where perception begins to blur with reality. Because from the outside, it can look like she stepped away completely. Like she disappeared from the world she once dominated. But in reality, what may have happened is something far more subtle and far more intentional. A shift into a life where visibility is no longer necessary. Where public attention is optional, where the spotlight is something you step into only when you choose to. And that changes everything. Because when someone who once lived in constant visibility begins to control when and how they are seen, the public no longer feels connected in the same way. And that disconnection creates mystery. So now the question becomes even more compelling. Did she step away for peace, or did she simply step into a world where being seen is no longer required? But if Dawn's story feels like a controlled shift, the next woman's journey is far more visible and far more talked about. Because she didn't just marry into wealth, she married into one of the most publicly discussed families in the Philippines. 5. Kaye Abad. Some faces don't just appear on television, they grow up with you. Kaye Abad was one of those faces. Rising to prominence in the early 2000s, she became a staple in Filipino youth-oriented dramas and shows that defined an entire generation of viewers. She wasn't just an actress people watched occasionally, she was someone audiences saw almost every day. A familiar presence in stories about love, friendship, heartbreak, and growing up. And because of that, she became more than a celebrity. She became part of people's routines, part of their memories, part of a time in Philippine television that many still look back on with nostalgia. But while her career followed a steady and visible path, her personal life was quietly moving in a different direction. She met and eventually married Paul Jake Castillo, a businessman and entrepreneur from Cebu, known not just for his ventures but also for coming from a family with strong wealth and influence. And with that marriage came a clear shift in lifestyle. Because unlike traditional celebrity relationships that thrive on visibility, this one existed in a completely different space. It wasn't built for the spotlight. It wasn't driven by media attention. It was quieter, more grounded, more rooted in family, business, and a life far removed from the daily demands of showbiz. And slowly, that difference began to show. After marriage, Kaye didn't make a dramatic exit from entertainment. She didn't announce a break. She didn't signal a final goodbye. Instead, her presence simply became less. Fewer projects, fewer appearances, fewer moments where audiences could see her in the way they once did. Until eventually, the rhythm changed completely. Her life shifted toward motherhood, toward family, toward a more settled life in Cebu, far from the constant movement of Manila's entertainment industry. And that's where perception begins to transform. Because when someone who was once constantly visible suddenly becomes less present, people don't immediately think about transition. They think about disappearance. They begin to ask questions. Where did she go? Why does it feel like she just vanished from the screen? What happened to someone who used to be everywhere? But the truth is often much simpler and at the same time, much harder for the public to accept. She didn't disappear. She relocated, not just geographically, but socially, emotionally, and even professionally, from a life centered on public attention to one centered on private fulfillment. But here's where it gets interesting. Even when the change is intentional, even when it's positive, even when it's exactly what the person wants, the silence that follows still feels loud. Because absence, especially from someone once so familiar, creates a kind of echo. And that echo keeps the curiosity alive. It keeps people wondering. It keeps the questions circulating. Because in the world of fame, being seen is everything. So now the question lingers once again. Did she step away to build a quieter, more meaningful life? Or did she simply enter a world where the public is no longer part of the story? But if Kaye's story feels like a gentle shift away from the spotlight, the next one brings us right back into the center of it. 4. Carmina Villarroel. By the time she entered the industry, she was already destined for visibility. Carmina Villarroel didn't just build a career, she built familiarity, the kind that grows over time, quietly but powerfully, until it becomes part of everyday life. For decades, she was everywhere. Television dramas, daytime shows, hosting roles, family-centered programs that brought her into homes across generations. She wasn't just a star people admired from a distance. She was someone audiences felt they knew. Someone who stayed consistent in an industry where faces often come and go. And that consistency became her identity. But her personal life was just as visible. Her long-term relationship with actor and director Zoran Legaspi evolved into a marriage that the public followed closely. Together, they became one of the most recognizable and stable celebrity couples in the Philippines. A partnership that seemed steady, grounded, and deeply rooted in both career and family life. And for a long time, everything about her presence felt constant, predictable in the best way, reliable. But then something subtle began to shift. Not a disappearance, not a controversy, not a moment that made headlines, just a gradual change in rhythm. Carmina, once constantly visible across television networks, began to step back slowly, becoming more selective with her appearances. She was still there, still active, but no longer everywhere. No longer part of the daily cycle in the way audiences had grown used to. And that difference, no matter how small, began to feel significant. Because in entertainment, visibility isn't just about being present, it's about being consistent. And once that consistency changes, perception changes with it. What used to feel like presence begins to feel like absence. What used to feel familiar begins to feel distant. And that's where the illusion starts to take shape. The idea that someone has stepped away. That someone has quietly vanished from the space they once dominated. Even when they haven't. Because the truth is often much simpler and much less dramatic. Life evolves. Priorities shift. And sometimes, the need to be constantly seen fades. What replaces it is something more controlled, more intentional, more private. A life where not every moment is meant for public consumption. A life where family, personal space, and stability take precedence over constant exposure. And in Carmina's case, that shift feels less like an exit and more like a recalibration. A rebalancing between public life and private reality. But here's where it becomes interesting. Because when someone has been part of people's lives for so long, any reduction in visibility feels amplified. It feels bigger than it actually is. It feels like something is missing. And that feeling creates curiosity. It keeps the audience watching even when there's less to see. Because now, it's not just about what she's doing, it's about what she's not showing. And that opens the door to the same question that continues to follow every name on this list. When a celebrity steps back from constant visibility, is it truly retirement? Or is it simply the natural result of choosing a life where not everything is meant to be seen? But if Carmina's story feels like a quiet balancing act between fame and privacy, the next one takes us into a completely different kind of spotlight. 3. Mariel Rodriguez. Before anything else, she was everywhere. Mariel Rodriguez built her identity on movement, energy, and constant presence. As a television host, she wasn't just seen, she was felt. Loud when she needed to be, playful when the moment called for it, and effortlessly engaging in a way that made audiences feel like they were part of the show. She thrived in live television, the kind of space where spontaneity is everything. And for years, she dominated it. Morning shows, variety programs, primetime appearances. Her face became routine, her voice became familiar, her energy became expected. She wasn't just part of the industry, she was part of people's daily rhythm. But then came a turning point that would redefine everything. Her relationship with Robin Padilla, one of the most controversial, influential, and widely discussed figures in Philippine entertainment and politics. When they got married, it wasn't just a union, it was a collision of worlds. Entertainment met politics, public admiration met public scrutiny, and private life became a national conversation. Because being with Robin Padilla doesn't come with being quiet. It comes with attention, constant attention. And suddenly, Mariel's life wasn't just about hosting shows anymore. It became about navigating a much larger, more intense spotlight, one filled with opinions, expectations, and non-stop commentary. Every move mattered. Every appearance was analyzed. Every absence was noticed. And slowly, things began to change. Not overnight, not dramatically, but gradually. Her once constant presence on television started to shift. Fewer shows, fewer appearances, more space between moments the public could see. At first, it felt temporary. Then it started to feel intentional. Because behind the scenes, her priorities were evolving. Marriage, motherhood, family life. A different kind of responsibility. One that didn't require cameras, but demanded presence in a much deeper way. And this is where the narrative begins to split. From the outside looking in, it appeared as if she was stepping away, as if the vibrant, ever-present host people once knew was slowly fading from view. But from the inside, something else was happening entirely. She wasn't disappearing. She was repositioning, moving from a life built on constant public engagement to one centered around personal grounding and family identity. But if Mariel's story is about navigating a life shaped by politics, fame, and constant scrutiny, the next one exists on an entirely different level of global attention. Because this isn't just about a powerful household, this is about legacy, about history, about being tied to a name that transcends entertainment entirely, a name that echoes far beyond the Philippines. Because the next woman didn't just marry influence, she married greatness, and her transformation has been watched by millions every step of the way. 2. Jinkee Pacquiao. Few names in the Philippines carry as much global recognition as Manny Pacquiao, and alongside him stands Jinkee Pacquiao, a woman whose life transformed in real time as fame, fortune, and national attention reshaped everything around her. Before the spotlight intensified, Jinkee's life was relatively simple and grounded. She wasn't chasing visibility. She wasn't building a public persona. She was, first and foremost, a partner, supporting Manny long before the world knew his name. But when his boxing career exploded onto the global stage, that quiet life didn't just change, it accelerated. Suddenly, everything became bigger. The victories, the headlines, the expectations. And with that came a new reality. One where privacy became a luxury. Jinkee was no longer just standing beside greatness. She became part of the image of it. From ringside appearances at some of the most watched fights in boxing history to political campaigns as Manny transitioned from public office to high-profile social events that kept her constantly in the public eye. Her visibility grew alongside his legacy, and over time, she carved out her own identity within that space. A style icon to some. A symbol of transformation to others. A woman whose evolution from simplicity to global luxury became a story people closely followed. But as the years passed, something began to change. Not dramatically, not in a way that sparked headlines overnight, but in a way that careful observers couldn't ignore. Her appearances became more intentional, more spaced out, more controlled. The once frequent glimpses into her life, events, public outings, social visibility started to feel less constant. And that shift created a subtle but powerful effect. Because when someone who once existed at the center of global attention becomes less visible, the silence doesn't go unnoticed. It grows. And with that silence comes interpretation. To some, it looks like she's stepping back. To others, it feels like she's fading from the spotlight. But the reality is often far more nuanced. Because Jinkee isn't absent, she hasn't disappeared. Instead, she appears to have transitioned into a different phase of visibility, one that is more curated, more deliberate, and less driven by the constant demands of public life. A life where presence is chosen and not expected. Where moments are shared selectively, not continuously. And in a world obsessed with constant updates and non-stop exposure, that kind of control can feel unusual. But if Jinkee's story is about evolving within global fame and learning to control visibility, the next name takes that idea to an entirely different level. Because this isn't just about influence. This is about legacy, power, and a name that has dominated headlines for decades. On 1, Gretchen Barretto. At the top of this countdown is a name that has never truly left public discussion. Gretchen Barretto has, for decades, existed at the intersection of glamour, controversy, and influence. An image carefully built through years of high-profile roles, public attention, and a presence that always seemed just a little more intense than everyone else's. She wasn't just visible, she was unavoidable. From film and television to social appearances and headline-making moments, Gretchen carried a kind of aura that made people pay attention, whether in admiration, curiosity, or speculation. And that level of attention didn't fade with time. If anything, it evolved. Her long-term relationship with Tonyboy Cojuangco Jr., widely known as Tonyboy Cojuangco, placed her firmly within one of the Philippines' most powerful and influential business circles. This wasn't just a relationship, it was an entry into a different world entirely. A world defined by wealth, legacy, and a level of influence that operates far beyond entertainment. And with that shift came a transformation in how she was seen, and how often she chose to be seen. Over time, her public visibility didn't disappear. It recalibrated. The constant appearances that once defined her presence became less frequent. The accessibility that audiences once felt began to fade. And what replaced it was something far more controlled, more intentional, more distant. She became selective about when she appeared, what she shared, and how much of her life remained visible to the public. And in doing so, she created a different kind of presence. One that isn't driven by constant exposure, but by impact whenever she does appear. Because with Gretchen, even silence speaks. Every absence feels deliberate. Every reappearance feels significant. And that dynamic keeps her firmly within public conversation, even when she isn't actively participating in it. But here's where the narrative becomes most powerful. Because unlike others on this list, Gretchen never fully stepped away from public relevance. She simply stepped away from predictability. People don't see her every day. They don't hear from her constantly. And that unpredictability creates something stronger than visibility. It creates intrigue. It creates speculation. It keeps people watching, even in moments where there's nothing new to see. Because the less she reveals, the more people try to interpret. Was it a conscious decision to withdraw from showbiz? Was it the natural result of entering a world where privacy is protected at all costs? Or was it simply evolution? A shift from being constantly seen to being selectively known. And that's what makes her position at number 1 so fitting. Because Gretchen Barretto doesn't represent disappearance in the traditional sense. She represents something far more complex, a transition from public figure to controlled presence, from constant visibility to calculated distance. And in a world where fame is often measured by how often you're seen, she proves that sometimes the most powerful position is choosing when not to be. And maybe that's the real pattern behind every name on this list. They didn't disappear, they didn't vanish. They simply stepped into lives where visibility is no longer constant, and where privacy becomes the real luxury. Because in the end, the spotlight doesn't always fade. Sometimes it's the person who chooses to step out of it. Which of these stories surprised you the most? And do you think they truly disappeared or just chose a different kind of life? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe to Her Status for more.